Well, hello and welcome back to the Dark Mods New Mappers Workshop. I'm Springheel, and today we're going to look at immersive details. These include things like sounds, particle effects, water, and a few other details that can really bring your map to life. So we're going to begin with sounds. There are two different types of sounds that you'll be using. One is ambient sounds, and these are sounds that seem to be coming from all around the player, either music or environmental sounds. And then there are directional sounds, which are coming from a specific place. Let's start with ambient sounds. We'll start with the simplest kind of ambient sound, and that's a soundtrack that plays throughout your map. It's a matter of personal taste, whether you want to have music throughout your map. Some mappers do and some don't. But if you do want to do it, this is how it's done. You right-click in an area of your map. It doesn't really matter where. I like to pick sort of an empty space where I can find things easily again. So I'm going to put it in this little empty space here. Right-click and then go to Create Speaker. So that'll open up a sound selector window. Open up the options there and you'll see a folder called Ambient. Under that there's three options, but for what we're doing right now you're probably going to want to stick with the Ambience folder. If you open that up you'll see a whole list of soundtracks. Everything in this folder is music. Now you can preview each of the sounds by clicking the little play button down at the bottom. Some of the sounds will say looped at the end or looping, and some won't. I believe all the sounds in this folder are intended to be looped, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So if it doesn't say looping on it, it's something you may want to test just to be sure. But as you can tell, each of the sounds in the folder has a very different mood to it, and the sound that you select will have a big impact on the way your map feels. So once you choose your sound and hit OK, you'll see that there's a new entity now in your map, which is a little green box at the center, surrounded by a red circle. Normally that red circle would determine how far the sound goes, but we're going to do something special here so that this sound plays over the entire map. If you click on your entity window and look at the properties there, we're going to add one more property to it. S_global 1. And what this does is it means that the sound plays globally. It doesn't matter where the player goes on the map, they will hear this music anywhere they go. And we want this sound to play more than once, so we'll need to add one more thing, S_looping 1. You need to set this value anytime you want a sound to continue to play over and over. So you can tell right away our sound is playing. If we no-clip and fly around the map, we can see it's playing everywhere in the map. One problem, it's really, really loud. Some of the default ambience were recorded with really loud volume for some reason. So I'm going to need to add something to reduce that volume. So let's go back to the editor. We're going to add an S_volume field. And then we're going to reduce the volume with a minus number. And I'm just going to guess at a value of 15. This is really trial and error. You have to decide how loud you want the sound in your map. I tend to like music to be pretty subtle. Okay, we've looked at three properties that you can give to speakers. Now, what if you don't want the sound to play over the entire map? You just want it to play in a particular area. I'm going to want the sound of crickets in my outdoor mansion grounds, for example, but I don't want that to be playing inside. So let's start by adding a speaker, just as we did before, and I'm going to place that in the top part of my outdoor grounds for now. So again, we're going under ambient, and this time down to environmental. And here you can see there are a lot of options in that folder. All of these are sounds that the player might hear depending on the type of environment they're in. There's a lot of sounds to choose from. I'm specifically looking for crickets here, and I've got several crickets to choose from. Now again, you'll notice that red circle around the speaker. That is something called the max distance. That is the maximum distance the player can hear that sound. When they step beyond the red circle, they cannot hear the sound at all. You can click and drag outside the circle to resize it the same way that you can for brushes. And also, just like brushes, if you click on the speaker itself, you can drag it around the map. I'm going to move mine a little closer to the ground. You'll see that when you resize the radius of the speaker there, it adds an S_max distance field to the speaker entity. We want the sound to repeat, so we need to add S looping 1. And if we just jump in game, you can see that that's enough to make it work. There is one thing that's not quite the way I want it though. Right now the sound fades as you walk away from the speaker, and you can hear it get louder with every step towards that single point. That's not really what I want. I want the sound to be more ambient, so it seems like it's coming from all around the player. Max distance determines how far away the player gets before the sound disappears entirely. There's also a value called min distance, and that determines how far away the player gets from the speaker before the sound starts to fall off. If the player is within the min distance range, then the volume is consistent. Most sounds default to a min distance of 0 or 1, and so the sound falls off from the speaker to the max distance range, and that's usually what you want. But for ambient sounds, you don't want there to be a specific point that the sound is coming from. So we're going to give the cricket sound a larger min distance. If you're finding all of this a little hard to understand, don't worry about it. All you need to do for environmental sounds or for music is to drag out the size of your speaker to the radius that you want, and then give it an S_min distance that's 3 or 4 units smaller than whatever the max distance is. I've done that here, and you can see now there's a second circle inside a smaller circle. That smaller circle shows the min distance. If the player's inside that circle, they'll hear the crickets at full volume, and the sound will fall off as they travel from that inner circle to the outer circle. Once you have the speaker the way you want it, you can easily just clone it and place it anywhere else on the map where you want it to play a similar sound. It's okay to have speakers that overlap as well. So I've added one speaker in each corner, and it sounds pretty good, except there is one zone right behind the AI where the sound seems to noticeably decrease. When you look at the two speakers in the editor, you can see why. There's a fade out zone where they just touch, but obviously the volume there is not going to be quite as loud. So I'm going to grab the top speaker and I'm just going to move it down so that there's very little distance between the two min distance zones. So you might be wondering if you have to worry about how much the radius of the speaker overlaps the inside of the mansion. We don't want to hear crickets there. The answer is that it depends, and we've got to talk a little bit about how sound travels in order to understand what it depends on. Back in lesson 2 we talked about visleafs, and inside a visleaf sound travels as you would expect. It goes straight from the speaker to the player. But when sound travels from one visleaf to another, it has to travel through the viz portals. It cannot travel through brushwork when going from one viz leaf to another. This means that viz portals are not only important for performance, but they're also really important in making sure sound goes where you want it to go. Here you can see that there's no cricket sound when I'm inside the room. The room is a separate viz leaf, and there's actually no path from the exterior, from the mansion garden, to that room. However, I added a room down below just by way of example that has a door. The cricket sound still plays in this room because there's a direct path through the open doorway. When I close the door automatically forces the viz portal shut, and that reduces the volume of the sound by, I think, 10 units. And the easiest way to see the difference is to lean into the door. When you lean into the door and put your ear up against it, you hear the sound at full volume. That's the sound you would hear if the doorway wasn't there and it was just an open archway. When you lean back, you can hear that the sound is being diminished by the door. Alright, there's 2 or 3 other things I want to show you about sounds. So let's talk about directional sounds now. These are sounds that are coming from a specific location. Let's do a common type of directional sound, which is a steam vent. So I'm going to add some pipes to the outdoors here, and then we're going to add the sound of steam to them. In some ways, this is easier than what we just did. Right-click, go to Create Speaker, and put the speaker where you want the sound to emanate from. And then we'll go to the Choose Sound window. Now we're not looking for ambient sounds, so we're going to have to take a look in some of the other folders there. And frankly, the sound folders are a bit of a mess. It can be very difficult sometimes to find what you're looking for. It takes a little bit of poking around. But eventually I stumbled on the steam sounds and picked the one that I thought was good. Now you notice here that there's 3 different steam sounds. You'll find sounds like that sometimes. The engine has the ability to pick randomly from a set of sounds just to keep things from being the same every time. So if you see multiple sounds in the list, that's why. Now if you notice, the entity already comes with a min distance and max distance set. So you don't have to change anything about the min distance. We want it 0 or 1. And if you want to change the max distance, you can just drag the circle out. The only thing we really have to change here is that we want the sound to loop. This is not a single puff of steam. We want the steam sound to continue. So we need to add s_looping1. Now, suppose you want a sound to repeat over and over again, but with a delay in between. For example, let's say you want the sound of a barking dog every so often. So we're going to start the same way we've done all our other sounds, by creating a speaker. We're going to go to Environmental Animals and look for a sound that we can have repeating in the garden. So move the speaker to where you want the sound to emanate from, and then we need to add a new field to the speaker called weight. The number that you add underneath is the amount of seconds that will pass in between each playing of the sound. So it'll play the sound once. If you put a value of 20, it'll wait 20 seconds, and then it'll play the sound again. Now that might start to get a little bit regular after a while, so you can add another field called random. Random changes the amount of time in between playings of the sound by plus or minus the value. So 20 seconds with a random value of 5 means that the sound will play every 15 to 25 seconds. And lastly, what if you want a sound to only play once? Well, if you just add a sound in there, don't set it to loop, don't give it a weight value, then it'll play the moment the map starts, which means that the player probably will never hear it. If you want the sound to play only when the player arrives, Then you want to use a triggered sound. So let's say we want to, let's use that cat sound we found earlier. And as the player walks around the corner of the garden, we'll have that sound play. We add in the sound just as we would normally. Select the cat sound, and then add to the speaker another new field, S_wait for trigger 1. This means the sound will not play until it's triggered. Triggers are actually not that hard to make. A trigger is basically an invisible brush, and when the player touches that brush, it activates whatever the trigger targets. So first, drag out a brush and put it wherever you want your trigger to be. I'm going to put mine right on the corner here so that the sound is triggered as the player walks around. Then, with the brush still selected, you right-click, select Entity, and then scroll down until you see the folder marked Triggers. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of triggers, but for this basic tutorial, we're just going to look at trigger once. With the trigger still selected, shift-click on your speaker to select that, and then hit Control-K. That will create the arrow that points from the trigger to the speaker so that you know that they're now connected. The same principle, by the way, works for anything that has an on-off state, like a door or a light. You can create triggers that target those kinds of things as well. And in-game, you can hear that all three sounds are now working. We've got steam from the pipes. If we sit and wait, we will hear dogs barking. And around the corner, there is the cat. So I think that's all we need to know for sounds. Now let's move on to particle effects. Particles are animated effects like the torch flames or fireplace flames or smoke or things like that. Many entities have particles attached by default, but sometimes they can add a lot to your scene if you include some custom ones. We're going to look at how to add simple particles like steam or smoke coming from chimneys. So I'm going to put some steam coming out of this pipe here. So the first thing to do is to right-click and go to Create Entity. This time we're going to go up to the Funk folder, and we're looking for Funk Emitter. So select that and add that to your map. You'll notice when you add it that it has an empty model field. That's why there's a little box there that says File Not Found. If you click on the model field, it'll give you a choice between model and particle. In this case, we want particle. Select particle and you will go to the particle viewer where you will see a long list of the different particles you can choose from. Now, the preview window gives you some sense of what they look like. I don't find it great for previewing. A lot of times I have to put a bunch of them in a map to try them out. In this case, we're looking for something called vent steam. Once you select the effect that you want, you'll see that the shader not found box goes away and you now see an image of the particle effect. We're almost done now. There's just one other thing to do. In this case, we want the steam to be coming out at an angle. The box defaults to having an arrow that points straight up, and if we just leave it, the particle steam will go straight up. If this were a chimney, that would be great. But since it's steam, I want to rotate the arrow so that it's pointing on an angle, and now the steam will come out and follow that direction. And in game, you can see that the steam is working. Particle effects add a lot of immersion to an otherwise lifeless scene. Feel free to experiment with other things on the list. The exact same technique is used for chimney smoke, for certain kinds of water, electrical effects. There's lots of things to play around with. So I think we'll end the lesson here. I know I said at the beginning we might go on to do water, but I think I'll save that for the next lesson. With sounds and particle effects, you've got plenty of things you can go and do in your maps to make them more immersive. And so I wish you happy mapping. Until next time.